Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be covering the Kisei Challenger deciding match that was played yesterday between Habu Yoshiharu and Hattori Shinichiro. So Habu needs really no introduction. He has the most title wins of anyone in history with 99 titles, but he's been stuck on that since I think 2019 or so. And he hasn't been a title challenger in 3 years. Uh, Hattori is kind of an up and coming younger player. He has a very interesting kind of creative style. And we're going to see who's going to get to challenge Fuji for the title here. So Habu got Sente, which is a huge advantage in pro games. And Hattori immediately blocks the bishop diagonal and then pushes the rook pawn. So generally speaking, this means he's going to go for Gangi, especially in like the current pro metagame. It's relatively rare that people are going to go for Yagura as Gote, I think, especially in this setup. The main reason is that Sente can kind of like push this pawn to here, forcing the bishop up, and then it becomes kind of a hassle to get this bishop out of the way if you want to make Yagura. So for the most part, it's bishop up to 3-3 and then make Gangi. And so Habu goes ahead and pushes the pawn to 3-6. This is indicating he wants to start an early attack with the silver called Hayakurigin and attack the bishop's head this way. And this is actually pretty much like the meta in this type of opening, where Gote is trying to defend with Gangi. So Habu goes, again, for a very meta setup with the silver on 8-8. This looks a little bit strange because you would expect the silver to want to go to 7-8 and make a left Mino castle. But it turns out the way that these attacks go, you usually like jump your knight and you end up giving your opponent a knight as part of the attack. And if your silver is on 7-8, and instead of the king on 7-8, you put the king on 7-9, there's a critical vulnerability where your opponent gets to drop a knight on 7-6, and your silver doesn't guard 8-8. Nothing guards 8-8. So it becomes like a really big vulnerability in your camp. And so right now it's actually more popular to put the silver on 8-8 and the king on 7-8 to kind of avoid that vulnerability. So yeah, Habu's kind of going for like the meta way to attack early. And Hattori is kind of just playing straight up Gangi and trying to defend. So again, this is very common to ignore this pawn push. If you take it, you're just speeding up the opponent's attack on the second file. So a very common way to defend that is to ignore it and counterattack on the other side of the board. And Habu goes ahead and brings the rook to kind of like really threaten this pawn takes on 3-4. And Hattori still just goes ahead and counterattacks. The main weakness in this setup is always going to be the bishop's head. So Habu takes. Hattori retreats the bishop to 4-2, lining it up with the silver. And then he kind of goes ahead, takes a second to take the pawn back, and then brings the rook. So he's hoping to bring the silver and have the rook help defend using its horizontal influence on the 6th rank. So here Hattori goes ahead and activates the bishop, saying, okay, if you move the silver up, I'm going to go ahead and counter and take your lance on 1-9. So Habu goes ahead, pushes the pawn to 2-4. Here it's really interesting. At first, you might think you want to just take, and this is actually what the engine wants to do. But there's actually a nice line that Habu has to sacrifice the pawn and then drop this. And this actually looks very scary, because if you jump the knight away here to try and save it like this, now we're getting this pawn promotion. And we're forking these pieces and our rook's getting in. So you actually can't do this. You actually have to play this way. If you're going to play this way anyway, you have to kind of sacrifice this knight and bring the gold and try and defend this way. Which is a very like engine-y way, I think, to defend this position. It's not a very natural thing for human players, I think. So Hattori does kind of, I would say, the more human things, which is to kind of just ignore this and counterattack on the other side of the board, right? To really kind of punish the main weakness of this setup, which is the bishop's head. Habu goes ahead and retreats the bishop. You might be tempted to drop it back to 6-8. This is kind of a more common thing to do, or at least a move that you might be used to if you've played Yagura and stuff. But actually, it's much better on 5-9 because you have the potential to swing it back onto the right side of the board, or even all the way to here once this is taken. Hattori goes ahead with his counterattack while Habu goes ahead and promotes the pawn. And it's the same kind of line here. So in this line, kind of no matter what you do as Gangi, you're going to kind of lose this knight. And it's just how quickly can you counterattack on the other side of the board. Interestingly, Hattori goes ahead and defends his gold first. This might look like an aggressive move because he's bringing the gold up the board. But what he's doing is he's prophylactically defending the gold with the silver because he knows this knight's going to get taken and the knight's defense of the gold is going to go away. Habu goes ahead, takes the knight, and then Hattori counterattacks with this pawn push on 4 or 5. So this is another nice move, nice benefit of this gold move. Habu goes ahead and retreats the silver. This feels kind of bad, but it's kind of the only thing you do because now this blocks the bishop in, right? Like you really wanted to get this in. Maybe he could have got it in anyway, but maybe it's just like too good to also like allow this pawn drop and stuff like that. So he retreats, also blocking the bishop from going all the way in. Hattori goes ahead and drops the pawn. If you take with the silver, the bishop's going to take. So again, it's a very similar dynamic where we're dropping these pawns to take knights on both sides of the board. And Habu takes time to go ahead and start defending on the other side of the board. Hattori ignores the pawn, pushes his own pawn. Habu takes. This is very scary, allowing this pawn promotion. But Habu's idea is to go ahead and run the silver up the board to 9-6. So if you kind of leave this silver alone, a pawn drop here blocks the rook. So Hattori goes ahead and he retreats his silver back. Now, interesting, Habu's opened up quite a bit of an advantage here. And what the AI wants to do is bishop to 7-7, activating the bishop along this diagonal. Habu instead plays a very interesting move. It's actually the number 2 move that the engine suggests, but none of the pros really understood this move at the time they were doing live commentary, which is pawn drop on 8-3. And the reason why this felt very counterintuitive to most players is that the natural move, rook to 7-2, it lines the rook up with the king, so you're kind of forcing the rook potentially onto a better square because already the silver and the pawn were kind of in the rook's way. And at the same time, when the rook was back on 8-2, it's vulnerable to a knight drop. And you already have the knight in hand, so if you get your rook in and the king has to run to 6-2, for example, you have a fork. Or, if a piece ever comes to 6-2, there's a fork here. So they didn't quite understand it, but you actually see the idea behind this move pretty quickly. So Habu goes ahead, threatens to enter the rook. And Hattori decides he's going to try and go capture the silver on the edge of the board. And the Toking takes the lance. This also prepares rook to promote on 2-1 with check. And Hattori goes ahead with his plan to capture the silver. Now here you see actually in the engine a crazy looking move. But first Habu decides to play the second best move, which is to promote the rook. Hattori defends with the pawn drop. And here, Habu actually plays the crazy looking move, which is bishop takes 8-6. This is just a pure, straight up bishop sack in order to get rid of this pawn. Well, there's 2 reasons, actually. And you can see the engine's not quite sure. But the only reason the engine's not sure about this move is that Hattori had this move first, rook takes 7-6. And against rook takes 7-6, Habu would have to drop the pawn, and then Hattori would be able to take the bishop with the rook, which is still a threat. And when Habu runs the silver, he can go ahead and sack the rook first. And this variation would have been much better for Hattori. And I think this is kind of what was missed a little bit by Habu as well, but also by Hattori. And what ends up happening is, Hattori does the obvious thing, like, lol, a free bishop. But what happens here is now when the silver retreats, you don't have the option to sack your piece off. And instead, the silver does a great job defending the attack and wins the tempo on the bishop. And the bishop just has to retreat. Interestingly enough, if we go back a bit, here what the engine wants to do is drop this lance on 6-6 first. It actually still wants to end up doing this bishop sacrifice, But it's saying, hey, like this is basically a free tempo, and we get to potentially set up an attack and sandwich the kinging from both sides. So like the engine's line here is bishop back, and then bishop takes h6. Pretty interesting. And for some reason, I think in this variation, the rook sack is not as good because you have this counterattack. So still a crazy move. This bishop takes. The rook takes variation was missed. Silver gets to retreat and win that tempo. And now here again, the best move according to the engine is to continue the attack with this lance drop on h6. It hits the silver and threatens this pawn promotion. So it's kind of like doing double work in terms of really combining with that pawn drop from earlier. And Hattori doesn't have a pawn in hand to block it, right? Habu goes a different route, which is to actually retreat the dragon and take the pawn. And so if you think about what happened in the last few moves, this knight was supposed to be dead, and this silver was pretty much dead. But instead, Habu sacked the bishop while being able to take the knight and the lance in the corner. And he saved both of these pieces. So you can almost look at it as a two-piece exchange where he gave up the bishop for the knight and the lance. And he got to make a dragon, right? And the dragon kind of got blocked by this pawn anyway. So it's doing more work defending than attacking. Unfortunately for Habu, the other variations were slightly better. So Hattori goes ahead, tries to get the knight into the attack. Habu goes ahead, shores up his camp, and Hattori continues with his attack. And now Habu goes ahead and sacrifices the pawn on 8-2, another benefit of the previous pawn drop, so that he can drop a pawn back and try and threaten to capture this knight. Knight sacrifices itself on 9-7 because it's going to die anyway. And then pawn drop on 2-6, backed up by the bishop to try and make sure that the dragon doesn't get back in the game. I'm going to try and speed through some of this move. This game was actually quite long. The two real like climax moments, this bishop sack, defensive bishop sacrifice was a crazy move, and then the end game was really, really tight. So Hattori retreats the bishop against the knight threat, which lets Habu go ahead and reactivate the dragon. Unfortunately for Habu, the knight's now going to get captured, but basically he's giving away the knight in order to activate this dragon, and he's going to try and go ahead and set up a bigger attack on the other side of the board first. So Hattori goes ahead, tries to block the dragon. Habu actually has to run the dragon, and now he goes and tries to counterattack with this pawn. So as Hattori takes, pawn takes, gold up, and now this is set up a nice potential lance drop. But interestingly, Habu doesn't drop it right away, and the engine doesn't want to drop it right away either. He finds the best move first, which is to push this pawn on the third file. And the reason why this is kind of nice is that it's actually an immediate threat that needs to be addressed. And so Hattori has to push this pawn. And now, eventually, potentially, when the rook gets back here, he's going to have a clear backline because the pawn had to move. So now he goes ahead, pushes the pawn. Interestingly, yeah, the engine here thinks it's a big advantage if Habu takes this pawn. Same reasoning, right? Like, you just made this pawn move, so I want to go back in. And again, Hattori doesn't have a pawn in hand to block this anymore on 2-4. So this would have been better. But, okay, like, this gold is pretty much hanging at this point if you just push this pawn. So it's hard to kind of ignore just a free gold. Hattori takes the time that Habu is using to take the gold in order to attack on the edge. Habu goes ahead and trades takes the pawn for the lance, and then goes ahead and takes the gold and allows the lance to promote on 9-9. It's going to take a while for this attack to materialize, and Habu's going to attack over here in the meantime. Lance drop on 4-4 like we saw before. Take. It's tough to ignore this, but also tough to take it. So you can see even from the engine evaluation, Habu has a very nice position here. Knight drop. Counterattack. There's really nothing he can do with the pieces he has in hand to defend anyway. That's a very common idea. If you can't defend, okay, you need to set up a counterattack. Knight drop on 7-4. Interestingly enough, he got to drop this knight to attack the rook anyway, despite that pawn drop from earlier. And Habu goes ahead and runs the king away. If you take, you're kind of going to get stuck in here. So he's going to go ahead and try and run the king this way to keep it safe. And now he goes ahead and runs the rook away. But you see here, actually, Habu has a big advantage. I think, yeah, the engine wanted to go this way instead. Obviously, he wants to involve the rook in the attack. Hattori's idea, I believe, is to use the rook defensively here, but apparently it doesn't work, right? Silver drop anyway, and I guess Hattori kind of figured out that it doesn't work because he decided to try and run the bishop instead of actually defending by take, and take. This is scary, but I suppose it's not a Tsumero yet either, right? So Habu kind of lines up the attack for the dragon. He goes ahead and defends against the bishop attacking the dragon with the silver. Trades to bring the rook back. Basically, the dragon and the rook here is a little bit closer to the king. So by making this kind of like bishop for a silver trade, you also pull the dragon back away. So it's really kind of like gaining tempo in exchange for the material. Hattori goes ahead and sacks the silver. If you take with the king, you're getting a little bit too close to the attack. He can even do this. Obviously, you can't take it because then the silver drop. Habu goes ahead and goes in for the attack here. This bishop's drop is really nice. If you take it, gold drop on the head. And it is a fork. King runs. Bishop takes. And so here, Hattori really doesn't have an option but to attack. Goes ahead, takes the gold. Gold takes. And Hattori's on the chase. He's trying to mate Habu's king. And you can see from a lot of these evals, there are multiple times in this attack from Hattori where Habu really only has one correct move in order to not get mated. He finds king 5-8 here. Hattori promotes his bishop. This looks super scary. But actually, this dragon is doing a very good job defending the king. And so as you can see from the engine, Hattori doesn't actually have a mate, but it's super scary. King runs, pawn drop. Again, using the dragon to defend. Silver drop, king runs. I think around here, Hattori also probably knows, okay, I don't have mate, but if I can somehow get rid of this dragon from the board, maybe my king will be safe. Lance drop. Knight jump, lance takes, dragon takes, silver drop 4-9. And again, you can see the engine here, only one correct move. Habu finds it, king to 4-7. Silver back. And you can even see here, the engine does jump around quite a bit. King back, gold drop 4-7, king 2-9. And you can see the engine just like, the engine barely knows what's going on either. So here, this is actually pretty common tactic where he sees that there's no mate here. And so if you run so that there's no continuing checks, then you get the turn to attack. So as Hattori takes on 3-7, Habu kind of knows, okay, this is my turn. I need to mate the king. And interestingly enough, there is a mate here, mate in 13, starting with gold drop on 4-3. But I think even the pro on commentary, not quite here because they're even looking at engine evals during the commentary. But in here, the pro was not sure if there is a mate or not after gold takes on 3-7. And this is a very hard mate in 13. So there are some mate in 13s that are at least reasonably simple. Really devastatingly, Habu does not find this mate. Hattori did say after the game that he saw the mating line, but he thought it was very difficult and thought it was his best chance to win the game. So really quickly, I'm going to show the actual mating line so you can see how difficult it is. It starts with gold drop on 4-3. And this move is one of the reasons why it's a very hard mating line. This is a type of very heavy move that you usually don't want to make when you're trying to checkmate the king, because it's very common that the king's going to run this way and your gold is just wasted away on 4-3. So it's a very counterintuitive move. But what happens when you drop the gold on 4-3, the king has to run, and now you actually get to sack the rook on 6-3. So if the king takes it, you have gold drop on 5-3, king to 6-4, and then gold back, and this is a checkmate. The pawn is covering this escape, and the horse covers the other escape. So he actually can't take this rook sack. And if he tries to run, you get to sack the rook again. And if you take, again, this is going to be a very easy mate, starting with gold. Sorry. Lance. So again, another rook sack that you can't take. And when you try and run the king up the board, it looks like your king's going to be safe because you have a lot of pieces defending. But if you read this out, actually, the king has to run, and eventually this king is going to come in to the checkmating pattern. So the obvious one is king here, and then the rook can come around to give check this way. If you block, silver drop on 3-6 is the deciding move. If you take with the gold drop on 3-8 is made. And if you run, gold drop on 3-9 is made. Yeah, and then here, if king to 3-6, you have basically the same move, except now you have to keep going this way. And if you go to 2-6, you can just drop the gold on 1-6, and silver drop on 1-8 is made. So really crazy mate that it turns out that having all of these pieces here actually blocks the king from being able to run this way. And this lone king that we ran into the corner is actually helping with checkmating the king and surrounding the king. So a crazy checkmate and a crazy hard mate in 13, even for professionals, even for Habu, pretty much the second best player of all time to find. So Habu ended up making kind of the more natural move, I would say, which is rook drop on 5-1. So there's already a pawn here, you can't, and he doesn't have any pawns to block. But it turns out that when you drop the rook here, the king can run to this side of the board. So instead of running towards all of your defenders, it turns out that running to this edge of the board, there's a lot more room for the king to run away. And Habu tries his best. He sets some traps. So here, if the king takes, it's actually a checkmate, starting with gold drop on 1-6. Basically here, and there's this move that's like an open check, or I can't remember what this is called. In Japanese, it's hiraki ote, which means like opening check. So you're kind of like discovered check, I guess, I think is what it's called in English. But yeah, unfortunately, you can actually just not take it and run back. And when you drop the gold on 4-6, now you can just sacrifice the horse away. And that has actually opened up the escape route for the king. Habu gives one more check. King runs. And here, Habu resigns. And Hattori Shinichiro has become the Kisei title challenger. It is his first title challenge ever of his career. So congratulations to him. I'm sure even for him, it's a little bit bittersweet because I'm certain everyone was rooting for Habu to win this and become the challenger. Even for me, I was potentially planning a trip to Japan had Habu become the challenger to go watch some of that in person. So yeah, obviously exciting for Hattori to get the challenge for a title. Disappointing for Habu, especially to lose it in this way where you had such a great position. You had mate on the board. You just needed to find it. But again, to be fair, both players were in Byoyomi at that time. And even the pro commentator was like, I don't see the mate. And you can see how complicated it was. It even involves the king all the way on 2-9. So hard to blame Habu, but again, he's basically, he's the goat of shogi. Maybe he's not the best player. I mean, level wise, Fuji's probably passed him already, but obviously Habu has the 99 title record still, and Fuji has a long way to go to match that. So yeah, like a little bit disappointing for me personally. But yeah, a really exciting match, a really well played match from both sides. We saw a crazy bishop sack, defensive bishop sack that ended up working kind of. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this commentary, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks.